The last time the world truly heard his voice, it wasn't on a radio. It wasn't inside a sold-out arena. It wasn't even steady. It was fragile, trembling, almost lost inside a body that had betrayed him. And yet, when that single line left his lips, an entire room full of grown adults began to cry. This was not the Randy Travis the world remembered. This was not the towering baritone who helped rescue traditional country music from fading into pop gloss. This was a man fighting to form syllables, fighting to stand, fighting to survive. At 66, the question is no longer about charts or awards. It's about what happened to a legend who once seemed untouchable. For decades, Randy Travis was the embodiment of authenticity in country music. In the mid-1980s, when Nashville was drifting toward slick production and crossover appeal, he arrived like a revival preacher. His 1986 debut album Storms of Life didn't just sell millions, it shifted the genre's direction. The deep, unhurried baritone, the spiritual undertones, the emotional restraint that somehow made every lyric hit harder. Songs like On the Other Hand and Forever and Ever, Men, weren't just hits. They were declarations that traditional country still mattered. Within a few short years, he had multiple platinum albums, Grammy Awards, CMA honors, and the kind of reputation artists spend entire lifetimes chasing. But behind the steady voice was a man who had always walked close to the edge. Randy's early life was turbulent. Brushes with the law as a teenager, rebellion, anger, instability. Music saved him. Or at least it seemed to, under the guidance of his longtime manager and later wife, Elizabeth Hatcher. His career was meticulously structured. Discipline replaced chaos. Faith shaped his public identity. To fans, he was calm, grounded, almost immovable. Then the structure began to crack. His divorce in 2010 marked more than the end of a marriage. It marked the collapse of the framework that had organized his world for decades. In the years that followed, headlines began replacing harmony. Arrests, public intoxication, mugshots that stunned longtime fans. The voice that once carried hymns of redemption was now associated with scandal. For many, it felt like watching a slow unraveling. For Randy, it may have been something far deeper. Isolation, confusion, the terrifying realization that fame does not protect you from yourself. And then came 2013. In July of that year, Randy Travis was admitted to a Texas hospital with viral cardiomyopathy, a condition that weakens the heart muscle. Within days, his situation escalated into something far more catastrophic. He suffered a massive stroke. Doctors gave him a 1% chance of survival. 1%. Brain swelling required emergency surgery. Machines breathed for him. Family members were quietly told to prepare for the worst. He did not die, but survival came at a cost so steep it redefined everything. The stroke left him with severe aphasia, limiting his ability to speak. His right side was largely paralyzed. The instrument that built his legacy, his voice, was suddenly inaccessible, as though locked behind a wall he could see but not break through. Rehabilitation was slow, painful, humbling. For a man who once commanded arenas with effortless authority, relearning basic words became an exhausting triumph. At 66, Randy Travis lives in a reality few could have imagined during his peak. Public appearances are rare and carefully managed. When he does step onto a stage, the energy shifts instantly. Not because he performs the way he once did, but because he stands there at all. Audiences don't cheer out of nostalgia alone. They cheer because he survived something that should have ended him. His wife, Mary Davis, has often explained that while speech is limited, comprehension remains strong. He understands. He feels. He responds with expressions, with quiet smiles, with fragments of melody that still live somewhere deep inside him. And sometimes, when the right song begins, muscle memory and spirit combine in miraculous ways. A few words escape, not polished, not powerful, but real. What happened to Randy Travis at 66 is not a tale of fading relevance. It is the story of a body altered beyond recognition. and a spirit that refused extinction. The tragedy is undeniable. A voice that once defined an era now struggles against neurological damage. Yet there is something almost unbearable in its beauty. Even stripped of fluency, he remains Randy Travis. And perhaps that is why people cry. Not because he is gone, but because he is still here. There is a particular kind of silence that follows catastrophe. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply settles in and refuses to leave. For Randy Travis, that silence became permanent after 2013. The stroke did not just interrupt his career, it rearranged his entire existence. And what makes his story almost unbearable is that it happened at a stage of life when he had already conquered the industry. He had nothing left to prove. The awards were secured. The Hall of Fame induction would eventually come. The legacy was written. And yet, fate demanded something else from him: endurance. In the months following the stroke, rehabilitation became his full-time occupation. Physical therapy sessions that lasted hours. Speech therapy focused on fragments, vowels, consonants, single words. Imagine being a man whose identity was built on vocal control and then being asked to celebrate forming a simple yes. Progress was measured in inches, not miles. There were setbacks. There were days when exhaustion outweighed hope. Neurological recovery is not cinematic. It is repetitive, frustrating, and brutally slow. But here is the part most people misunderstand. Randy did not disappear. He remained present, cognitively aware, emotionally responsive. Mary Davis often described moments when music would trigger recognition deep within him. Lyrics that he could not speak conversationally sometimes emerged when sung. This phenomenon, known in neurology as melodic intonation therapy response, suggests that music is processed differently in the brain than ordinary speech. For a singer like Randy, that difference became a lifeline. One of the most powerful public moments came when he appeared at the Country Music Hall of Fame induction ceremony in 2016. Seated, limited movement, speech largely impaired. The room was filled with peers who had built careers partly because he paved the way. When the final line of Amazing Grace approached, something remarkable happened. He sang it, clear enough, recognizable, just a few words, amen. But those two syllables felt seismic, not because they were flawless, but because they were defiant. At 66, his daily life remained structured around care and adaptation, mobility assistance, communication adjustments, public engagements carefully planned to minimize strain. The glamorous chaos of touring life is gone. There are number 20 city runs. No late-night studio sessions chasing the perfect vocal take. Instead, there is routine, stability, protection of energy. And yet, there is also something quietly powerful about the way he occupies space now. When Randy Travis enters a room, the reaction is not nostalgia alone. It is reverence. He represents survival in an industry that often discards its wounded. Country music has always celebrated resilience in lyrics, heartbreak, faith, redemption. Randy now embodies those themes in flesh and bone. His existence has become testimony. Financially, his earlier success ensured security. Multiple platinum records, songwriting royalties, decades of catalog revenue. These created a buffer that many artists never achieve. That stability matters. Catastrophic medical events can devastate families economically. In his case, legacy earnings allowed focus on recovery rather than survival. It is an often overlooked dimension of celebrity tragedy. Preparation changes the aftermath. Emotionally, the transformation has been profound. Fame once required projection, commanding crowds, sustaining image, delivering performance. Post-stroke life demands vulnerability. There is no hiding physical limitation, no masking neurological damage. And strangely, that vulnerability has deepened the public's connection to him. Fans who once admired his voice now admire his perseverance. At 66, what happened to Randy Travis is not simply medical. It is existential. When your defining gift is altered beyond recognition, who are you? For many performers, retirement itself triggers identity crisis. In his case, retirement was not gradual. It was forced, violent, immediate. The stage lights went dark overnight. But identity, it turns out, is more complex than ability. Randy Travis is still the architect of a traditionalist revival in country music. He is still the voice that influenced generations, from neo-traditional artists in the 1990s to modern performers seeking authenticity today. His catalog continues streaming. His songs remain staples at weddings, funerals, church services. Cultural imprint does not vanish because speech becomes difficult. There is a temptation to frame his story solely as tragedy. And undeniably, it is painful. A once commanding vocalist now struggles with spontaneous language. A physically imposing performer now relies on assistance. But there is another layer that complicates the narrative. He survived. The stroke that nearly killed him did not erase him. It reshaped him. And survival at that scale changes perspective. Public expectations fade. Industry politics lose meaning. What remains are fundamentals: breath, awareness, love, presence. Mary Davis has described moments of quiet humor. Randy reacting to jokes, expressing personality through expression and tone rather than lengthy speech. Those glimpses matter. They confirm continuity. The man is still inside. At 66, when audiences see him, they are not witnessing decline alone. They are witnessing endurance. They are seeing a human being who endured a 1% prognosis and emerged altered but alive. And in an era obsessed with perfection, there is something almost radical about that visibility. Perhaps that is why the footage makes people cry. It is not pity. It is confrontation. Confrontation with fragility, with time, with the reality that strength is temporary, but dignity can be permanent. Randy Travis once sang about forever, about faithfulness that outlasts circumstance. Life has tested those themes in ways no songwriter could script. The voice may not soar as it once did, but the meaning behind it has grown heavier, deeper, more earned. At 66, what happened to Randy Travis is this. The music stopped in one way and began again in another. There is an uncomfortable truth about legends. We prefer them frozen in their prime. We replay the hits. We rewatch the performances. We preserve the baritone as it was in 1987, rich and unshakable. But time does not negotiate with memory. And what makes Randy Travis's story so emotionally devastating is that the contrast is impossible to ignore. The man who once stood center stage without visible effort now navigates each public step with calculation. The voice that once flowed like steady thunder now emerges only in fragments. And yet, in that contrast lies something even more powerful than perfection ever was. At 66, Randy Travis represents a living paradox. He is simultaneously diminished and monumental, physically limited, yet culturally immovable. His body tells one story. His legacy tells another. And when those two narratives collide in a single appearance, audiences are overwhelmed because they are witnessing both loss and survival in the same frame. What many people do not realize is how neurologically cruel a massive stroke can be. Aphasia does not erase intelligence. It interrupts expression. Inside, the thoughts may remain intact, but the pathway to release them is damaged. Imagine being fully aware, yet unable to translate thought into language. For someone whose entire career was built on lyrical storytelling, that reality carries a particular cruelty. Music had once been his most fluent language. After the stroke, even ordinary conversation became a mountain. But the human brain is complex, and music is stored differently than speech. Therapists have long observed that stroke patients who struggle to speak can sometimes sing. Melody activates alternative neural circuits. In Randy's case, this neurological quirk became a bridge. It did not restore his career. It did not reverse paralysis. But it offered moments, brief, luminous moments, where the old voice flickered through. Those moments matter. They matter because they challenge the assumption that a person is defined only by current capability. Randy Travis is not the totality of his physical limitations. He is the sum of decades of artistic contribution layered on top of present resilience. When he appears at events, seated, supported, quiet, the applause is not charity. It is recognition. Recognition that he helped shape the soundtrack of countless lives. There is also something profoundly human about watching strength transformed. During his peak years, Randy projected steadiness. His delivery was calm, almost restrained. He did not rely on vocal acrobatics. He relied on sincerity. That same sincerity now defines his public presence. He does not hide from the damage. He does not attempt to simulate what is no longer there. He simply shows up as he is. At 66, his life is structured around protection. Physical therapy to maintain mobility, speech exercises to preserve what progress exists, medical monitoring to prevent further complications. Stroke recovery is not linear. There are plateaus. There are days of fatigue. Neurological injury changes stamina. Public appearances require energy budgeting. A single event can demand days of preparation and recovery. And yet, he continues to attend select ceremonies, award recognitions, and milestone tributes. Why? Because presence has become his new performance. He may not sing entire verses, but when he enters a room, the emotional weight shifts instantly. Younger artists approach him with reverence. Veterans embrace him with visible respect. His story has transcended genre. Financially, the catalog sustains him. Decades of royalties ensure that his music continues working even when he cannot. In an industry where many artists struggle after health crises, this stability shields him from another layer of tragedy. It allows dignity. It allows medical focus without the added burden of economic collapse. That security is not often discussed publicly, but it quietly shapes outcomes. Emotionally, the transformation from dominant performer to survivor alters perspective. Fame once meant constant output, albums, tours, interviews. Now, life revolves around smaller victories. Standing unassisted for a few moments, articulating a familiar word, recognizing a melody instantly. These are triumphs invisible to the casual observer, but monumental within the context of neurological trauma. What happened to Randy Travis at 66 is not simply that he suffered a stroke. It is that he endured the psychological reckoning that follows. Identity reconstruction, acceptance without surrender, a redefinition of purpose. Many people never confront such drastic reinvention. He had no choice. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part is this. He never got a farewell tour. No final album intentionally labeled as goodbye. No gradual curtain call. One summer, he was a touring legend. Weeks later, he was fighting for survival. The transition was brutal, abrupt, unscripted. Yet somehow his story does not feel unfinished. Because legacy is not dependent on current output. It is dependent on impact. And Randy Travis's impact remains embedded in the DNA of modern country music. Traditionalist waves in the 1990s owe something to him. Gospel-infused country crossovers owe something to him. The insistence on lyrical sincerity in a commercially shifting industry. That was his fingerprint. At 66, when people watch him now, tears come not just from sorrow, but from recognition. Recognition that life is fragile. That talent can be interrupted without warning. That the human spirit, however, can outlast catastrophic odds. The stage lights may no longer blaze around him the way they once did. The microphone may not capture full verses anymore. But the silence surrounding him is not emptiness. It is weight. It is history. It is proof that a man can lose his instrument and still remain the music. And that is why the footage is so hard to watch. Because it reminds us that greatness is not erased by vulnerability. It is revealed by it. There is something uniquely cruel about losing the very gift that made you unforgettable. For Randy Travis, the stroke did not merely interrupt a career. It silenced an instrument that had become part of American cultural memory. When people speak about what happened to him at 66, they often focus on the medical facts, the viral infection, the the heart failure, the 1% survival odds, the emergency brain surgery. But the deeper story is not clinical. It is psychological. It is spiritual. It is about what remains when the applause fades and the spotlight no longer serves as identity. For decades, his voice had functioned as authority. It carried conviction without aggression. It carried faith without preaching. It carried heartbreak without melodrama. That baritone was not flashy. It was grounded. And grounding is precisely what his music offered to millions. Weddings, funerals, Sunday mornings, late-night drives, his songs were there. They became embedded in private memory. That kind of cultural imprint does not evaporate because of neurological trauma. But imagine the internal reckoning. Imagine knowing what you once were capable of. Knowing the exact sensation of effortless projection into a microphone. Knowing how it felt when a room fell silent at the first note. And then waking up into a body that will not obey the same commands. Stroke recovery often involves grief, not for death, but for former selfhood. That grief can be relentless. It resurfaces in quiet moments, in old recordings, in archived footage that feels like it belongs to another lifetime. At 66, Randy Travis lives in coexistence with that past version of himself. He cannot escape it, nor does he attempt to erase it. Instead, his life now reflects adaptation layered on top of legacy. There is a quiet dignity in that adaptation. No public bitterness. No visible resentment. Just persistence. His wife, Mary, has often described the strength required behind scenes. Recovery is not dramatic in daily practice. It is repetition. Physical therapy to maintain muscle memory. Speech exercises to preserve neural pathways. Structured routines to prevent fatigue. Neurological injury demands discipline. The same discipline that once fueled his career, now redirected toward survival. And here is what makes the story even more emotionally complex. His presence has become more powerful than performance ever was. When Randy appears at a tribute event or award ceremony, the atmosphere shifts. Not because people expect a full rendition of a classic hit, but because they understand what it cost him simply to be there. There is something sacred about a survivor occupying space publicly after being told he would likely not survive at all. That survival reframes everything. At 66, he no longer measures success by chart positions. Success is measured in stability, in incremental progress, in days without medical setbacks. The metrics have changed, and that recalibration is something few public figures are forced to confront so dramatically. The country music community has not forgotten him. On the contrary, his influence continues to echo in new generations who seek authenticity over spectacle. Many contemporary artists cite him as a foundational inspiration, not just for vocal tone, but for thematic integrity. His catalog still streams. His songs still rotate. The industry moves forward, but his imprint remains fixed within it. There is also a profound lesson embedded in his story about human fragility. We are conditioned to believe that talent equals permanence, that greatness shields against catastrophe. But neurological events do not discriminate. They arrive without regard for accolades. In that sense, Randy's story strips away illusion. It forces confrontation with vulnerability, the universal kind. And yet, it also offers something rare. Proof that dignity can outlast devastation. He does not hide from cameras. He does not retreat completely into privacy. He allows the public to see him altered. That visibility matters. It challenges cultural discomfort with disability. It disrupts the idea that only peak performance deserves applause. Sometimes endurance deserves it more. At 66, what happened to Randy Travis is not a neat narrative arc. It is ongoing. Stroke recovery does not conclude with a final chapter. It evolves. There are improvements. There are limitations that remain permanent. There is adaptation that becomes second nature. Life after catastrophic illness is not about returning to what was. It is about building what can be. And perhaps the most devastating truth is that his story does not feel like an ending. It feels like a transformation that none of us were prepared to witness. The man who once sang about eternal devotion now embodies it in a different way. Devotion to survival, devotion to presence, devotion to the simple act of continuing. When people watch him now, tears surface because they're seeing both memory and reality collide. They remember the unshakable baritone. They see the quiet survivor. The contrast is jarring. But within that contrast lies something almost transcendent. He is still here, not preserved in vintage recordings alone, not confined to nostalgic playlists, but physically present, breathing, responding, enduring. The voice may no longer command arenas, but the life behind it commands respect. At 66, Randy Travis stands as a reminder that greatness is not erased by hardship. It is redefined by it. And perhaps that is the hardest thing to accept, that sometimes the most powerful performance a legend will ever give is not on stage, but in survival itself. If you step back and look at the arc of Randy Travis's life, what makes it so emotionally overwhelming is not just the rise or the fall. It is the interruption. Legends usually get a narrative we can understand: struggle, breakthrough, dominance, graceful exit. His story refuses that structure. It accelerates to the peak, stabilizes into legacy, and then, without warning, fractures. And at 66, he exists in the aftermath of that fracture, carrying both the brilliance of what was and the reality of what is. There is something deeply unsettling about watching a once invincible public figure become visibly fragile. During his prime, Randy projected steadiness. He did not chase trends. He did not rely on spectacle. His strength was quiet confidence. That is part of why the stroke feels so shocking in retrospect. It targeted the very qualities that seemed most stable: his voice, his control, his composure. Neurological trauma dismantles control first. It reduces certainty to unpredictability. For someone whose entire career depended on precision, that loss is profound. Yet, when observers describe him today, they often use the same word they used decades ago: steady. Not because his body functions the same way, but because his demeanor does. There is no theatrical display of self-pity, no public rage at fate, just presence. That steadiness now carries a different weight. It is no longer the steadiness of a confident star. It is the steadiness of a survivor who has already faced the worst-case scenario and lived through it. At 66, Randy Travis represents something rare in modern celebrity culture: unfiltered vulnerability. In an era where image is meticulously curated and weakness is often hidden, he appears exactly as he is. The paralysis is visible. The speech limitations are obvious. The physical adjustments are clear. And rather than diminishing him, that transparency has amplified respect for him. The music industry is notoriously unforgiving when artists cannot perform at peak level. Careers stall. Attention shifts. New voices replace old ones. But Randy's case defies that pattern. His catalog did not vanish. His influence did not shrink. In fact, after his stroke, many listeners revisited his earlier recordings with renewed reverence. The songs took on added depth because audiences now heard them through the lens of survival. There's also a spiritual layer to his story that cannot be ignored. Much of his music leaned into faith, redemption, and perseverance. After his stroke, those themes stopped being lyrical motifs and became lived reality. When he sang gospel-infused country songs in the past, they carried conviction. Now those same songs feel almost prophetic, as if he had unknowingly been rehearsing for the greatest trial of his own life. The human mind struggles with abrupt transformation. One day he was touring. The next, he was in intensive care with a 1% survival prognosis. That kind of shift leaves no room for gradual acceptance. It forces immediate confrontation with mortality. Many people never come that close to statistical extinction and return. Surviving such an event changes internal architecture. Priorities rearrange. Ego dissolves. Small moments gain magnitude. Observers sometimes ask whether he misses performing. The more accurate question may be whether he misses the version of himself that could perform without limitation. Because the stage was not just a workplace. It was identity. It was confirmation. It was a place where effort translated directly into response. Now, response exists without effort. He receives standing ovations simply for appearing. That dynamic must feel surreal. At 66, Randy Travis stands as a reminder that legacy is not erased by illness. If anything, illness clarifies it. We no longer measure him by vocal range or chart statistics. We measure him by impact, by influence, by endurance. His story has evolved from musical triumph to human resilience. There is a quiet tragedy in knowing that new recordings will likely never capture the fullness of what his voice once delivered. But there is also a strange grace in knowing that he does not need to prove anything further. His work is complete. The albums exist. The influence is documented. What remains now is life, fragile, altered, but undeniably present. When people say, "Try not to cry when you see him at 66, the emotion is not driven solely by sadness. It is driven by confrontation with reality. We see time. We see vulnerability. We see the cost of survival. And we see that greatness does not shield anyone from biological fragility. And yet, somehow he endures. He endures in the way audiences rise when he enters a room. He endures in the way younger artists still cite his tone as a gold standard. He endures in the way his songs continue to soundtrack private milestones across generations. At 66, Randy Travis is no longer defined by the power of his voice alone. He is defined by the persistence of his presence. The body may have changed. The delivery may be limited. But the essence, the sincerity that made him beloved in the first place, remains intact. Perhaps that is the most powerful transformation of all. Because sometimes the final act of a legend is not about reclaiming what was lost. It is about showing the world that even when the music quiets, the man behind it can still stand. Time does something strange to legends. It turns them into symbols. It smooths out the messy parts, polishes the highlights, and compresses decades into a handful of defining moments. But Randy Travis, at 66, resists simplification. His story is not clean. It is not convenient. It does not end with a triumphant comeback tour or a dramatic last encore. Instead, it unfolds in quiet persistence, a long, ongoing act of courage that rarely makes headlines but reshapes everyone who witnesses it. What makes his journey so emotionally overwhelming is not simply what he lost, but what he continues to confront daily. A massive stroke does not just affect mobility and speech. It alters perception, coordination, stamina, and independence. Tasks once automatic become deliberate. Simple communication requires patience from both speaker and listener. The world moves at its usual speed, but the body demands a slower rhythm. That mismatch can be isolating. And yet, Randy Travis has not retreated into invisibility. There is something profoundly moving about the way he allows himself to be seen. Not as he was in his prime, but as he is now. In a culture obsessed with youth and peak performance, he stands as a reminder that value does not disappear with physical decline. When he appears at ceremonies or tributes, the applause that fills the room is not nostalgic politeness. It is recognition of endurance. It is gratitude for influence. It is admiration for resilience. At 66, he carries a kind of gravity that few artists ever attain. Not the gravity of celebrity, but the gravity of survival. People look at him and see more than a country star. They see proof that life can be interrupted and still continue with dignity. That quiet message may be more powerful than any chart-topping single. It is also worth acknowledging the invisible labor behind his survival. Recovery from a stroke of that magnitude requires relentless support. Medical professionals, therapists, caregivers, and most significantly, his wife, Mary. Stroke rehabilitation is not a short chapter, it is an ongoing commitment. Physical therapy to maintain strength. Speech exercises to stimulate neural pathways. Monitoring to prevent secondary complications. Each day is structured around maintenance and protection. For someone who once lived on the road, fueled by the adrenaline of live performance, that transition to medically structured routine must feel surreal. But within that structure, there is stability. Stability becomes the new success. A stable year, a stable month, a stable appearance without health setbacks. These are victories measured differently than platinum records, but victories nonetheless. There's also a subtle shift in how audiences experience his music now. When listeners revisit his earlier recordings, the smooth phrasing, the unshakable tone, they hear something layered beneath it. They hear fragility. Not because it was there originally, but because hindsight reframes everything. Knowing what he endured makes every sustained note feel almost miraculous in retrospect. And perhaps the most haunting dimension of his story is this. He never had the chance to decide when to step away. There was no carefully planned farewell. No final album intentionally crafted as a goodbye. The interruption was abrupt and merciless. One week he was touring. Weeks later, doctors were preparing his family for the possibility that he would not survive the night. Survival, in that context, changes meaning. It is no longer abstract. It becomes urgent, physical, statistical. 1% is not symbolic. It is nearly impossible. To return from that threshold is extraordinary. But returning does not mean restoration. It means adaptation. At 66, adaptation defines him. He adapts to speech limitations. He adapts to mobility challenges. He adapts to a world that still recognizes him instantly, even if he cannot respond with the same fluidity he once had. That adaptation requires humility. It requires patience. It requires acceptance without surrendering self-worth. There's a quiet heroism in that. Not the loud, cinematic heroism of dramatic comebacks, but the steady heroism of waking up every day and continuing. The heroism of allowing people to see vulnerability without shame. The heroism of carrying a legacy that no longer depends on performance. Country music has always told stories about hardship, about loss, faith, redemption, endurance. Randy Travis once gave voice to those narratives. Now he lives them. And in doing so, he has become something even more profound than a singer. He has become testimony. Testimony that identity can survive beyond ability. Testimony that dignity can outlast devastation. Testimony that influence is not erased by illness. When viewers say it is hard not to cry watching him at 66, the tears are layered. They carry sorrow for what was lost. They carry gratitude that he is still here. They carry recognition that time spares no one. And they carry something else, respect. Respect for a man who faced near extinction and continues to exist with quiet strength. The spotlight may no longer follow him across arenas. The microphone may not capture the full resonance of his once unmistakable baritone. But the presence remains. The history remains. The humanity remains. At 66, what happened to Randy Travis is not the disappearance of a legend. It is the transformation of one. And sometimes, the final chapter of greatness is not written in applause. It is written in survival. As the years move forward, what becomes increasingly clear is that Randy Travis's story is no longer about decline. It is about permanence. At 66, he stands at a crossroads between memory and reality, between the echo of a once dominant voice and the quiet strength of a man who survived what should have ended him. And perhaps the most powerful truth is this. The silence that followed his stroke did not erase him. It amplified the meaning of everything that came before. There's something almost poetic about the way his life unfolded. In the 1980s, when country music risked losing its traditional backbone, he reintroduced depth, restraint, and sincerity. He didn't shout to command attention. He grounded the room. That same grounding quality defines him now. When he appears publicly, he does not need to perform. His presence alone carries narrative weight. It's easy to measure success in trophies and sales numbers. By those standards, his achievements are already secured. Multi-platinum records, Grammy Awards, induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame. But at 66, none of those accolades define him the way survival does. The medical reality of his stroke was devastating. Doctors warned of catastrophic brain damage. The prognosis was nearly impossible. Yet he endured. That endurance reshaped his legacy. What many people fail to understand is that catastrophic health events alter not only the body, but also the tempo of life. Everything slows. Conversations slow. Movement slow. Planning becomes more deliberate. The world, however, does not slow down with you. That could be isolating. For someone who once operated at the speed of touring schedules and recording sessions, adapting to a slower rhythm demands psychological recalibration. And still, he adjusts. There is no evidence of resentment in his public demeanor, no visible frustration at what cannot be reclaimed. Instead, there is a calm acceptance that feels consistent with the man audiences first admired decades ago. The steadiness remains. Only the form has changed. When fans say they cry seeing him now, they are reacting to contrast. They remember the smooth baritone that seemed incapable of cracking. They see the visible effort required for speech. They remember the commanding posture of a stage veteran. They see assisted mobility. But beneath that contrast is something deeper: continuity. The eyes are the same. The quiet composure is the same. The identity is intact, even if the instrument has been altered. At 66, Randy Travis embodies a truth that few celebrities ever demonstrate publicly. Worth is not dependent on productivity. In entertainment culture, relevance often hinges on output. Albums, tours, appearances. But he no longer produces in the traditional sense. And yet, he remains relevant. His influence continues to shape artists who grew up studying his phrasing and tone. His recordings continue to reach new listeners. His earlier work now carries additional gravity because audiences understand what followed. There's also something transformative about witnessing a legend stripped of performance, but not of dignity. In a world that often hides disability, he allows it to be seen. That visibility challenges assumptions. It disrupts the myth that public figures must remain flawless. It replaces the illusion of invincibility with something far more human. Behind the scenes, life is likely structured around careful health management. Stroke survivors face ongoing risks, monitoring blood pressure, managing medication, attending therapy. These routines are not glamorous, but they are essential. Each stable year is a quiet triumph. Each public appearance, without medical complication, is a victory. And perhaps the most striking part of his story is that he does not attempt to recreate what is gone. There is no forced comeback narrative, no exaggerated promise of full restoration, just acceptance layered with perseverance. That restraint feels authentic to who he has always been: measured, sincere, grounded. Country music has long celebrated resilience through storytelling. Randy Travis once gave voice to characters navigating hardship, faith, and redemption. Now, his own life mirrors those themes. The songs about endurance resonate differently because he lives them. The lyrics about grace feel less metaphorical and more literal. At 66, what happened to Randy Travis is not simply that he lost the effortless command of his voice. It is that he gained something else, a legacy defined not only by sound but by strength. Strength to endure paralysis. Strength to navigate aphasia. Strength to appear publicly without hiding vulnerability. Strength to continue being present in a world that remembers him at full volume. There is an uncomfortable beauty in that transformation. It forces us to reconsider what greatness truly means. Is it the peak, the flawless performance? Or is it the ability to remain standing when the performance is no longer possible? His life now answers that question quietly. The microphone may no longer capture the resonance it once did. The arenas may no longer host his tours. But the respect he commands has not diminished. If anything, it has deepened. Because survival, when faced with near impossible odds, carries its own authority. At 66, Randy Travis is no longer just a country legend frozen in golden era recordings. He is a living testament to resilience, a reminder that identity can endure beyond physical capacity, a reminder that legacy does not dissolve when circumstances change. And maybe that is why it's so hard not to cry. Not because he is broken, but because he is still here,